Hello there, and welcome back to Grass Me Up, the podcast all about Premier lawn turf and sports turf. It's still flipping hot. It's above 32 degrees Celsius, but my office is quite cool today, and I'm not sure why. That probably means it's going to be even hotter. So I thought I'd jump on and record a quick podcast about water and addressing one of the things I've been hearing on social media about water, and then talking about why plants actually need water. Because I think sometimes people get confused about why they need water and what they use it for. So we'll talk about that. And it's an interesting topic. I like it. I spent several years of my life studying it at universities up and down the country as a researcher. So it's something I know a fair bit about. So one of the things we've seen on social media is lawn care professionals going on reassuring people that their lawn is not dead with the heat wave and saying, it's just taking a rest, it's just having a little siesta and it's going to grow back. And that is conventional wisdom. That's what happens year in, year out when there's a heat wave. However, this heat wave at the moment is pretty unprecedented and it's extremely early in the year. So my thoughts are, I wouldn't be guaranteeing the grass is going to grow back when we've had two extreme heat waves. And, if this heat wave carries on through July to the end of July without any rain and into August, then we could get a situation where certain grasses do die off, especially if it stays above 30 degrees Celsius and there's no rain. So obviously it goes dormant for the first week to 28 days, but you will get death if we stay in these sorts of really hot, really dry conditions for 30 to 45 days, true death, when the soil completely dries out, even the deepest root tips don't get any water and become brittle, especially in sandy soils. If you're in an area with sandy soils, this could be an issue. Your first species that's going to die out is annual meadow grass. So sometimes considered a weed. In fine turf, in sports turf, definitely a weed. That will die off in 14 to 21 days. And you might think, oh, that's good, that the better species will take over, but it can look very unsightly. And then after probably, let's say a week after that, 2 weeks after that, you'll get perennial ryegrass, Lolium perenne, the backbone of most family lawns. And with a moderate root system, you'll survive in a brown dormant stage for 4 to 5 weeks, but then the crown will begin to perish. And then after that, the really resilient ones like red fescues, they will survive. They will start to die off if it was really, really prolonged, like 2 months. So yeah, as I said, sandy soils, that's going to be where grass will die off first. If you've scalped it or mown very low, then it will die off. So you'll see a lot of not golf greens because they're irrigated, cricket pitches where there is no irrigation, very, very low cuts. Crickets are very vulnerable to this, and newly seeded lawns, freshly laid lawns that don't have the deep root system. In 30 degrees Celsius with no water, they could die in 4 to 7 days, a newly freshly laid turf. So I think in Northamptonshire and Leicestershire, where we're based, we're going into a hosepipe ban tomorrow at 1 a.m. So I'm going to go and mow. I'm not going to water my lawn, but I'm going to water my hollyhocks in my front garden because I've got a very big display of hollyhocks, and maybe my favourite tree. I might give that a bit of a dousing. You don't normally irrigate trees, but I am cultivating one particular Spanish fir, which is my favourite species of plant. I don't know if I've talked about that. It basically looks like a stickle brick plant. If you ever go to Kew Gardens, check out the Spanish firs. Anyway, what do plants actually use water for? Well, the majority of the water they use is the same reason you use the majority of water, the same reason for the majority of the water that you use, and that is it's to allow gas exchange. So in your lungs are extremely wet, and that's so that the CO2 can dissipate into the air and you can absorb and dissolve oxygen in that lovely high surface area to volume ratio lungs. So all that moisture, all your lungs are kept exceedingly moist to allow that gas exchange, because it only happens on moist surfaces. And then you breathe that water out. Unfortunately, you lose that water. It's something that neither plants nor humans have been able to evolve out, is that you simply have to lose water if you want to have gas exchange. Now, there are ways to minimize that, and it's the same in plants. Inside every leaf, there is something called a spongy mesophyll, which is like the sponginess of your lungs. And while plants don't breathe in and breathe out, pushing air in, pushing air out, they do allow gas exchange through pores, stomata. And it's that need to keep those cells moist is the reason why plants lose so much water. If they didn't have to keep those cells moist, they would use a fraction of the water that they actually use. They would be able to absorb all the nutrients and water for photosynthesis and things like this without the need for vast quantities of water every day. So people think, well, water is required for photosynthesis, water is required for nutrient absorption, and it is, but that is not the main reason. The main reason they use water is to allow for gas exchange. Just like your body, you need water to keep your cells turgid, for metabolic processes, to excrete stuff out of your kidneys, but the vast majority of the water you consume goes out through your breath and is lost that way, not through urine and things like that, unless you're drinking a hell of a lot of water. And the same for plants. So they will the chemical reaction for photosynthesis is water plus CO2 produces oxygen and sugars driven by sunlight. And so water is required for that, but it's a very small amount. To get nutrients in from the roots, that happens through water. And so it's not normally the rate limiting step, though. They normally can absorb as much nutrients. The amount of water they have is not the limiting step, unless it comes to things like calcium. If it's very humid, then they can struggle with calcium. So like in tomatoes, you get blossom end rot if it's too humid and you're not getting the water moved up. But the plants can absorb lots of nutrients through that water. So they need water to keep their cells turgid. If plants don't have water in their cells, they wilt, and so they need to keep the water for that. And so, but it's keeping that gas exchange that's a critical point. Grasses have lots of stomata. There are some hairy grasses that will limit water loss. If you look at some plants, they only open their stomata at night. So cacti, succulents, and they have a special type of photosynthesis called CAM photosynthesis. And so that limits their water loss by obviously not opening their stomata or opening their guard cells and opening the stomata in the day. Other things like marram grasses, not a species for lawn, but in sand dunes, they have their stomata protected in sunken stomata and the leaves fold up to prevent water loss through the stomata when it's really, really dry. But obviously closing those stomata, those pores, and limiting water loss has a limit on the amount of gas exchange that you can do. So they will be limited in how much CO2 they can absorb because of that. And so if you limit the amount of CO2 that you can absorb, then the photosynthesis will reduce. And that's why when there's dry conditions, you won't get the growth on the lawn, because the pores in all the leaves in the grass are closed, and so the CO2 is not going in, and so the plant can't grow. You'll also have the issue that they can't get the water for turgor growth, so they won't grow. They won't be able to push growth, they won't be able to push that cell out because of lack of water. Interestingly, in mild water deficits, root growth continues, and that's because obviously they need to search for more water, and the roots can go deeper, and so root growth will continue through a mild summer drought. And it's just the stuff on the surface. You think your plant's dead, you think it's not growing, but actually it will be growing underneath because it's searching for water. And it's interestingly, the hormones that stop the growth in the top of the leafy growth actually keep it promoting its growth down in the roots. And obviously that will come to an end once the plants become extremely stressed and unhealthy. So in a severe drought, severe heat wave, then root growth will stop as well. And then eventually the plant will die if it just cannot get enough water and it just succumbs. It might, and then, so you will get plants dying off if this does continue for a prolonged period. The other damage we'll get, you say, no, your grass will recover, your grass will grow back. Well, fairy rings will kill off. Anywhere there's a fairy ring, you might have a fairy ring. This happened last year. Fairy rings normally, they can be some people like them, some people consider them unsightly. Certainly in sports turf, they stop the rolling of balls because they grow too high. They don't kill off the grass normally, but in a drought they do because they exude hydrophobic waxes, and so they're not pathogenic fungi, but they do kill the grass in the area they've been, and they've exuded all these waxes. And so the problem of fairy rings killing off grass will be far worse this year because of this really hot conditions, and you'll need to reseed, scarify, and treat the grass almost like it's been burnt off. Other issues, bitch scorch will be far, far worse in high temperatures. You think about 30 degrees Celsius, the nutrient burn from bitch scorch will be worse. So you'll get grass death due to that. That's exacerbated during the heat wave. Anyone who's applied a fertiliser and not really, because they think their grass has gone yellow, and they think just by applying a fertiliser, that will be made worse by the heat. So you'll get loads of scorch. So fertiliser scorch will become more of an issue during a heat wave. In fact, at Utrema, we've put a label now on every single box going out the door until it rains again, saying, do not apply fertiliser to baked dry soil in the summer heat. Wait until the rain returns, or irrigate until the top 10 centimetres of soil is wet. So don't just give it a light sprinkling of water and then think you can fertilise, because you can't. You need to have wet soil, actively growing plants before you're going to prevent scorch, never mind that fertiliser become useful. So that's a big issue. We don't just want to sell product. We want to sell product and people to be satisfied and be really happy with the results. And so that's why those labels have been going out on the bottles. What else can we say about? So something else to say about scorch. Let me try and think. 1 second. My number one top tip. Obviously, you can't irrigate if you are under a hosepipe ban, which are coming in thick and fast. But look at the weather forecast. Know when your next rain is forecast and prepare for that. So the two products you definitely want to be applying just before it rains, and you need to be fairly certain it's going to rain, is seaweed extract and then a wetting agent, so something like our clay drainer product. Not only will that ensure that the grass recovers, but the clay drainer will ensure that the water doesn't run off away from your lawn, away off your beds, into your neighbour's garden or anywhere else, and is actually absorbed into your garden. Clay becomes extremely hydrophobic, and so getting that clay drainer on just before it rains, it will be an absolute game changer. It'll be a win, but you've got to be certain it's going to rain, because you don't want to be putting a surfactant down and then the soil dry out and not be wet. That's the worst case scenario. So go on the BBC or the Met Office, they have that percentage chance of rain. That's got to be fairly high. That's got to be up there in the 80s, or you've got to see a big black cloud coming your way, and get out there with clay drainer. And then you could probably wait with the seaweed extract until it has rained. It's really going to help with that recovery. It's going to help with the nutrient absorption. It's going to help the beneficial bacteria in the soil recover. Just stress resistance. Seaweed extract would be great for that. And then if we get a prolonged period of rain, then something like a potassium silica or a sea silica will make that plant a lot more resilient for the next time there's a heat wave. No point putting silica on when there's a heat wave, because it's quite a harsh chemical if the plant's delicate. But if the plant's growing really well and you want it to be super resilient, then putting on a silicon fertiliser just before a heat wave, that would be my number one top tip. So either our sea silica or our potassium silica if you're a professional. So yeah, top tips there. Before a heat wave, silicon. Coming out of a heat wave, wetting agent like our clay drainer just before it rains, and then a seaweed extract just after that to help it recover. So hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully you didn't find it too waffly, and you wasn't a repeat of anything I've talked about before. I've had some good feedback from people on social media, especially Matthew Cooper of Cooper's Lawn Care. He said to keep on going with the podcasts. He's really enjoying them. Always good to hear feedback. People are actually listening to it, because podcasts are the one type of modern media where you get zero stats on how well you're doing, who's listening to you, whether they buy product from you at the end of the day, whether they look at your website. But I know from personal experience that I love podcasting. I love podcasts, and I trust people who create podcasts. There's a great guy who does Google ads and podcasts, and I work with him, giving him thousands of pounds because of the great content he's given on podcasts that he's done for free and providing knowledge, and just because he loves the subject. And hopefully that comes across that I love the subject. If you've got any questions, let me know. And you've got any interesting topics for podcast episodes, let me know as well, because I'd love to do that. I'd love to address what you're seeing out there and any topics you'd like to talk about. Obviously, it's going to be fairly quiet going into summer, and the real lawn care push is in September, October, November. But let's get ahead of the curve and address some issues before we get into the really busy period when we won't have time to record any podcasts. So thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in any of anything I've talked about, go on to utrema.co.uk. Utrema is Latin for wasabi, if you're struggling to spell that. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.